Mary Ikoniadou lectures in the Cultural and Critical Theory of Photography at the University of Central Lancashire in the UK, where she is a member of the Research Centre for Migration, Diaspora and Exile. And she co-directs the funded project Patterns of Migration. Her research is situated in the intersection of visuality and politics, focusing on the study of illustrated magazines and published ephemera as socio-political agents of ideology, propaganda, and international belonging. Following her career in graphic design, Mary was a research fellow at the Jan van Eyck Academy in the Netherlands, while her research has also been supported by the Prussian Cultural Heritage Foundation, the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence, the Modern Greek Studies Association, and the Association for German Studies in Great Britain and Ireland, among others. She has published on the production and reception of political publishing during the Cold War, on the notion of solidarity within the Global South, and on the unstable and material relationship of pictures to conflicts. These works and others have been released by and appeared in the Manchester University Press, the Freie Universität Berlin, the Humanities Journal, MDPI, and Routledge. So please welcome Mary Ikoniadou to our meeting.
Thank you very much, Andres. Thank you very much to the online seminar organizers for the invitation. It is my honor, and as I was saying at the beginning of the seminar, I'm also overwhelmed and quite shy because I'm sharing this kind of virtual stage with two of my academic heroes. So I will begin with my contribution. Pyrsos, which in English translates as torch, was a Greek language illustrated magazine published in Dresden of the GDR, that's the German Democratic Republic, between 1961 and 1968. It was initiated by the exiled Communist Party of Greece, while its high production values were supplemented by a subsidy provided by the GDR's International Relations Department. Amidst the turbulent 1960s and in the context of the Cultural Cold War, Pyrsos magazine was published by the synergies of Greek and East German communists, yet in more ways than one, its production was not typical of the aesthetic and political strategies of neither of its institutional producers. Over 42 pages and approximately, the size of the magazine about 20 by 28 centimeters, Pyrsos was issued bi-monthly and in approximately 10,000 copies. It was primarily distributed to Greek political refugees. However, and exceptionally for this type of publication, it circulated in and had subscribers in institutions and individuals across Western Europe, from West Germany to Switzerland and Sweden, certainly to Greece and Cyprus, as well as to Canada and Australia, pretty much everywhere apart from the United States, where it was read by economic migrants and students, besides the Greek political refugees in the socialist states. The magazine's distribution across Cold War borders further discloses its editorial strategy and political aims, ultimately to construct a collective national cultural subjectivity for its readers. Let me turn to a brief historical context, which is unfortunately always necessary and takes some of the time from the presentation. But in as short as I can, the political refugees had to flee Greece during or in the aftermath of the Greek Civil War that lasted from 1946 to 1949, in order to avoid persecution following the defeat of the communist-led Democratic Army against initially the British and later the US-supported Nationalist Army of Greece. The refugees who were granted political asylum in the Soviet Union, as you can see in the map, all in Greek, but colorful enough to be distinguishable in terms of the states it represents. They were distributed across the Soviet Union and the People's Democratic Republics in Eastern and Central Europe, with the exception of Yugoslavia. So this is the map I was referring to. And does that mean that you haven't seen the copies of Pyrsos, the front cover?
No, not yet. So this is great. Thank you for showing those.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So by the time Persos magazine launched its first issue in 1961, the Greek political refugees had been living in what was meant to be temporary exile that meant to last until the political conditions would allow for their return to Greece for 12 years. By that time, the refugee children and youth, which was the target readership of Persos magazine, had a faint or no recollection of Greece, were increasingly growing distant from the political situation of a homeland they had neither fought for nor visited. So when they were fleeing from the mountains of northern Greece, the refugees, the Greek government issued a series of resolutions, confiscated the properties and stripped them of the citizenship rights, effectively depriving them of the prospect of repatriation officially until 1982. Greece emerged out of the civil war completely transformed in every aspect of its social and political life. The Greek state promoted an ideology of nationalism and anti-communism that also aimed to keep the left out of the circle of power through the violent persecution of hundreds of thousands to prisons and exile islands that for many lasted until after the fall of the dictatorship of the colonies in the 1970s. And here are some spreads from Persos magazine depicting this political climate in Greece in the 1960s. So these are the spreads I was showing you, and I will go back to that. So the decision to publish Persos was on the one hand, the result of this political climate that I just described in Greece, and also following Khrushchev's de-Stalinization and peaceful coexistence rhetoric, which in turn brought the shift in the political strategy of the Greek Communist Party from being ready to use armed struggle towards seeking peaceful parliamentary representation. Persos was a political project with multiple aims and a multifaceted, often ambivalent editorial strategy. On its pages, past and contemporary struggles in Greece were juxtaposed with the achievements of the young refugees in the socialist states, with reports from the Greek diasporas, the 1960s political mobilization of youth within and outside Greece, and the liberation struggles in the global south, amongst others. However, also the magazine included highbrow and popular material, sometimes reprints from Greek, German, and to a lesser extent, Eastern European and Soviet press, alongside original contributions in the field of literature and poetry, essays on culture and history, reportage and travelogues from the socialist states, from the West, articles on architecture, interior design, fashion, recipes, and political cartoons, and a full-color 8-page supplement, which was printed in a very nice matte stock, paper stock, dedicated to children. So here, hopefully, you are seeing some of the spreads I am trying to share of travelogues.
It's perfect.
Excellent, thank you. This is an article on beatniks, and this is an article on the youth that that disclose their secrets, illustrated by famous France Mazzarel, and this is a cover of the children's, one of the children's supplements. Persos' design layout was almost exclusively conceived to function around the unit of the double-page spread. As such, most features fitted perfectly around 2 pages, designed on a flexible 3-column grid. Across its pages, visual and textual elements were not merely placed, but mostly carefully, consciously assembled, designed as to form productive relationships. For example, different types of images, processes, and genres, visual and textual fragments, depictions of different temporalities were juxtaposed alongside divergent geopolitical or historical contexts as to conceptually complement and/or antagonize each other. As art historian Peter Feiss writes, in the GDR by the 1960s, self-contradictory dialectical thinking had replaced former structures of exemplary ideals that expected viewers to worship them. Instead, dialectical thinking invited viewers to think through their ambiguous reality. And as is the case, I have a lot more to say on that, but you know, in kind of the benefit of the time, which I've already wasted with the PDF, I will continue to say that, you know, Here I primarily draw on the aesthetic method of historicization, in which contemporary events are placed in the past alongside the production of contradiction between past and present narratives, and the demonstration of similarities between the past and the present, as some devices also employed in Brechtian aesthetics, as a very good example of that kind of theoretical, if you like, approach, and are visible in the design of Persaud in its efforts to challenge readers and reclaim dominant versions of history. So let me move to an example to make the case. Here, in the fifth issue of Persaud magazine, published in 1961, we see a striking composition that depicts a cutout photograph of the Victory, the Nike of Samothraki, in the centerpiece of its front cover. The world-renowned ancient Greek sculpture is reproduced on the cover of Persaud from a black and white photographic print, in a representation that is made to look as if the photograph has been torn, probably by hand, out of its material context before being placed prominently on the center of the magazine's front cover. The theatrical stance of the headless goddess is further exaggerating by the way that the sculpture has been photographed, while its stance expresses determination, also rendered visible by its forward stride and the wide opening of her wings. Nike, in its dynamic posture and its position, seems to defy materiality. It is as if the marble sculpture of the cutout photographic print has just been placed on the page, or at the same time is about to fly off the page. As such, the crude black outline visible around the picture can be read both as a trace of rapture and that of suture. Behind Nike, the large photograph of a mass gathering is partly obstructed by a semi-transparent magenta ink. And although I don't have time to kind of go into the analysis of the image of the photograph, I will briefly tell you that it depicts the liberation of Athens on the 12th of October in 1944. And in short, that was a decisive shared moment of joy, particularly for the readers who struggled, lived, fought in the 1940s occupation of Greece by the Nazi and the Civil War, and consequently exile or migration. On the back cover, the typographical composition demands the recognition of the role of the left, the justification, as the text reads, of its national resistance in the 1940s against the Nazi occupation. The photographic depiction of victory and liberation constitutes visual fragments that carried with them the appearances of the material production. The montage highlights the gesture of Nike's abduction by exposing the material properties of the photographic paper. Its stare, which in turn expresses the political violence of the left, as such, it registers a formal and affective crisis in the reading of the image and the reading of the magazine as a whole. In the first instance, the placement of the photograph of Nike over the photograph of the day of liberation is as if symbolically reconstitutes the Greek left's accomplishment of victory in attempts to mend, to suture that which was violently taken away, ripped out. But one can argue, in a similar way, in the way that the citizenship of the Greek refugees was ripped out. Typically for the magazine's design, the layered juxtaposition assembles rather than synthesizes the various elements. The efforts of its restitution, marked in the montage by a crude black outline around the figure of the knight, can also be read as an attempt to blend the cutout photograph into the background, while simultaneously demonstrate the effort of placing it there. Persaud's editorial producers, I argue, employ the magazine's format to historicize the notion of resistance and reclaim the left's place in the national narrative from which it had been violently excluded. That was typically for Persaud, where the composition across the front and back cover of the magazine required the active engagement of readers in the production of meaning. And also, again, I don't have time to go into it, but this kind of notion that the front and the back cover becomes one composition and is treated as such is in the majority of the magazine's front and back covers. Again, also the use of colors, of the cyan, magenta, white, and yellow as modernist gestures that supported the presentation of a fragmented reality. Pirsot's distinctive visual language, progressive cultural politics was the outcome of a series of factors, and most importantly, the magazine's editorial board and its art director, Nikos Manousis. Here we see two books that Nikos Manousis not only translated, but also illustrated, or not only illustrated, but also translated. Manousis was an established and widely exhibited artist in the GDR prior to his post in Pirsot's, and he wasn't a refugee himself. He was already there, as participants who have interviewed have told me, when they arrived in the GDR. He was a student of the acclaimed Weimar artist Leah Grundig, and amongst others, he represented the GDR in the 1957 All-Union Art Exhibition in Moscow. Notably, Manousis' most profound engagement with publishing models was his co-editorship of the Junge Kunst magazine, alongside prominent GDR intellectuals such as the painter Walter Wumaka and the author, playwright, and director Heine Müller. Junge Kunst design has been likened to that of the AZ, the Arbeiter Illustrated Zeitung magazine, because of its effective Latin ideological layout. However, I have not yet been able to find a copy of the magazine, although I have found extracts from it. But you know, it's one of my hypotheses that I want to continue further, because I want to continue the research on Nikos Manousis further, that Pirsot's design was ultimately and intimately linked to his art director's work and past, if you like. One more brief example before I conclude. Less dramatic, possibly from the Nike cover, but you know, for way of another example, here we see a photograph of 3 Greek political refugee students on the right-hand side, all dressed up on the graduation day from the University of Dresden, and that's on the right-hand page, juxtaposed with an interview of young refugees. On the left-hand page, the article reports on Greece's budgets on education, whilst the black and white photograph depicts police brutality against students at the University of Athens. So the juxtaposition here is, you know, pretty evident and easy to decipher in terms of the struggles of the youth in a oppressed political climate in Greece, and the successes of the refugees in the socialist states. That's the next spread, which you can hopefully see. And here we have 2 full color pictures. The big one on the right-hand side of the mountains, instead of a caption, has the motikot, a folk song, which says that the folklore Greek song that praises the longevity of the mountains, that they do not age despite the passing of the time. So here we have the internal mountains that become a symbol of national destiny, at the same time as a call for the young refugees in the previous page, and again in the text of this article, as a call for the repatriation to Greece. Despite the acknowledgement of the challenging political condition in the previous spread, the educated young refugees are called to prepare to offer their knowledge and experience gained in socialism towards building the future of Greece. It asks them to prepare to visit the mountains themselves, a site of resistance and struggle for the parents, and once lived mnemonic landscapes that carried affective memory. As well as lessons in topography, communicating the process of mapping the homeland, these landscapes still exist in a contemporary 1960 Greece. And so, as I argue, they also belong to the present as well as the future as the landscapes of return. In sum, in Pirsot's spread, these different temporalities and places, they mapped at the same time as constructed the notion of Greece. They called for action in the present and imagined a future, and a future of repatriation. To sum up, Pirsot's editorial strategy utilized the double-page spread as the primary unit of its design, or for its design, in which images, text, and concepts interrelated, complemented, or antagonized each other. Pirsot's readers were expected to engage with these different layers of cognition and confronted with the possibility of synthesizing the visual, material, and ideological fragments. By doing so, they were invited to participate in the conceptual, aesthetic, and political renderings across and beyond the pages of the magazine, to actively imagine and hence prepare for the restitution of the Greek left and the repatriation of the Greek political refugees in the future. Thank you very much for your time and your patience with my PDF.